Chapter 68. Thomas and his agents arrived late in the afternoon at police headquarters in Oklahoma City. He was anxious to talk to the officer in charge and get as much information as he could before checking into the hotel. After everything that had happened lately, he was not about to stay in his mother's house. "Screw that shit," he had yelled at Carrie when she suggested that it would be good for him to go home and sleep in his old room. He felt his old life was gone forever, and his only goal was to catch a murderer. Whether or not that murderer happened to be his mother was not the issue, not anymore. This visit was purely professional, and he had every intention of keeping it that way. The afternoon was cool, but Thomas felt hot and uncomfortable. Although he had been born and raised there, he did not feel this was his home any longer. Today, he was lost and felt abandoned, emotions he hadn't thought his mother would ever put him through. He tried to clear his mind and diminish the pain swelling up in his chest. It was important that he kept his thoughts on the task at hand. Anything else would only interfere with the successful outcome of his mission. He straightened his tie and adjusted his jacket and sternly walked toward the desk. "Officer Brio?" Thomas asked, holding out his hand as a gesture. A gesture of what, Thomas wasn't sure, but he couldn't think of anything else to do. "Not another one of you guys!" Brio snarled up at Thomas. "Don't you ever just go away? Shit, this is worse than a case of the runs." "Another one, sir?" Thomas asked. "Another what?" "FBI, of course. What else would I be talking about? A fucking bothering individual. That's what I call you guys. I'm a very busy man, Agent, and the information you're looking for is in that box over there. Help yourself, but I would appreciate a little peace and quiet right now. If you don't mind, that other so-called agent has taken up enough of my time chasing fictitious suspects." Brio turned his back on Thomas and started shuffling through the box of papers. "Fictitious, Officer Brio?" Arvil asked brashly as he stood in the doorway drinking from a paper cup. He approached Thomas with a sadistic smirk on his face. "Ignore this old goat. He hasn't been much help anyway, and is more of a pain in the ass than anything else." "Nice that you made it, Agent Edwards, isn't it? I'm Agent Arvil, Devin Arvil." He held out his hand. Thomas stared at Arvil's palm. If he grabbed hold, would it be admitting his mother's guilt and acceptance of her capture? As past memories soared through his mind, it felt as though he was on an endless merry-go-round, and the horse he rode continued to go higher and higher. Would it be possible for Toby to ever get off and go home? He looked up into Arvil's face, but did not take the officer's hand. "Yes, Agent Arvil, we need to get on with it as soon as possible. My agents and I are anxious to put this one to bed." Arvil turned his hand over to see if anything was on it, as Thomas turned to his small group and pointed to them one by one. "This is Agent Clark, Agent Owens, Agent Snyder, and Dr. Thurston." Arvil was hesitant to offer his hand again, but Carrie, with her infamous intuition, immediately offered hers. Arvil clasped Carrie's hand gently and gave her a warm smile of thanks. After finishing their introductions, Thomas put Carrie and Terry to work sorting through the information crammed carelessly in the box. Then he walked over to the window and watched the traffic hurrying by. People were busy with their normal everyday activities, and it seemed like more than a lifetime ago since his life had any type of normalcy. What frightened him the most was the nagging feeling that things would never be normal again. But then, what was normal? "Nice day out there, Thomas." Dr. Thurston was standing behind him. "I guess you could say that," he replied, not releasing his gaze from the busy traffic. Dr. Thurston was now standing next to Thomas and leaned against the glass. "You want to take a walk? Get out of here for a few? I'll buy you a cup of coffee. There's a diner across the street." He raised one eyebrow and shoved his hands in his pants pockets. "Why not?" Thomas answered and turned to head toward the door. He hollered over to his agents that he'd be right back, and Carrie nodded. After Thomas and Dr. Thurston left, she glanced at Owens and Snyder and shrugged her shoulders. "I really think he's losing it." "You have to have it before you can lose it," Snyder replied with a grin. Owens never responded. He continued to dig through the papers that were mixed and jumbled in the box. Chapter 69. February is a cold, dreary time to be living or working in D.C. The chilly Arctic wind blows with an unyielding ferocity where the trees stand naked and gray against the frozen waters of the nation's capital. The morning dew crackled under the feet of Dr. Lewis as he stepped off the sidewalk and onto the sparkling grass. He pulled his coat snugly under his chin and hurried toward the building, anticipating relief from the bitter cold. The traffic was still thin during the early morning. The sun was just cresting the horizon, and the thought of being home next to a warm fire with his wife was tugging at his heart. But if this meeting would help to save Maddie's life, the cold and loneliness was worth bearing. He cautiously approached the gate and gave his identification to the guard. He glanced around and wondered if the plainclothes security really enjoyed their careers. He'd been told that working a few years at the White House was a great career booster, but he honestly didn't understand how anyone could stand working in the strict conditions. The guard handed him back his badge along with a temporary White House pass. He was giving an escort and followed her down the path toward the Oval Office. Guards were standing at every corner with microphones in their ears and walkie-talkie in their hands. He smiled at one guarding a door, and the man smiled and nodded back. Lewis walked into the Oval Office and was handed a cup of coffee by John Green. Their eyes met for only a brief moment before Green looked away. "What's up, John? That you can't look me directly in the eyes," Lewis stated sarcastically. "Nothing," Green said meekly, and found a seat. Harold Davison motioned Lewis to sit next to him. "Have a seat, Jeff, please. You make me nervous standing there. Please come sit by me." "Not sure if I want to sit too close, Harry. It might be contagious," Lewis snapped. The three men sat silently, eyeing one another, each with their own agenda. They didn't realize their agendas mimicked one another. Lewis was out to save a woman he loved as much as if she was his own daughter. Green was worried that their cover would be exposed and their careers and reputation would be in jeopardy. Davidson was worried about his nation and whether the agency would remain intact to continue its missions. Each man with his own goal, each goal enhancing the other's position. "A bit ironic, boys, even if I do say so myself," a female voice came from behind. Davidson immediately stood and offered his hand. "Madam President, so nice to see you again." "Save it for someone who gives a damn, Harry," the president responded sternly. As she entered the room, several other individuals followed and took seats, unfolding their notepads in their laps. "You gentlemen are looking quite comfortable," the president said. "Well, I'm about to change all that." "Madam President, if I may be so bold," Davison started, but she interrupted him in mid-sentence. "No, you may not be so bold. If you can't control your lips while you're in this meeting, Davidson, I'll have to get some masking tape to help you." She glared at him, and his eyes darted to the others. Green was avoiding him, but Lewis was smiling and winking. "Now let's get started, shall we? Gentlemen, we have only a few hours. I've read your reports, and I agree with Mr. Lewis. I believe that this plan will work if given our full attention." She paused to review her notes. "But ma'am," Davidson started, "I cannot give my full approval for this. I honestly believe that my version would be much more effective. While the public is reading about a crazy, murderous woman, we can quietly quell this whole thing." "Mr. Davidson, what did I tell you about that masking tape? Honestly, I just don't know about you." She walked over to Davison and knelt down in front of him, placed her hand on his knee, and looked directly into his eyes. She spoke very softly. "I do not like you very much. You know that, don't you, Harry? In fact, I've cursed the day I appointed you. Now I have a few options at my disposal. I can eat crow and dismiss you. I can use the agency to dispose of you. Or I can tolerate you. Which do you prefer?" She cocked her head to one side and raised her eyebrows, awaiting an answer. Davidson looked at her, then glanced around the room for support, but everyone was looking elsewhere, not wanting to get involved. "I'd say something right about now if I were you, Harry," Lewis whispered in his ear, then turned away. "Well, Harry, my old friend," the president rose slowly, not removing her eyes from his and taking a seat across from him. "I'm waiting for an answer." She placed her hands in her lap and glared at him. "I'm sorry, Madam President," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I do apologize. I will be happy to carry out whichever version you deem correct." He wet his lips and glanced over at Louis, who nodded back his approval. "Great," she said, jumping up from the chair. "Now let's get down to work. I want this whole thing finished within the month, so that gives you about 3 weeks. Chapter 70. Jeff Lewis stood back and admired his office. Very happy to be home. He felt good, damn good, better than he'd felt in many months. Even though the snow was falling heavily again and blanketing the city in white, he felt a warmth flowing through his bones. "God, I feel great," he yelled out loud. "Thank you for answering my prayers. I love you." He kissed his clasped hands and guided them toward the heavens. He looked up at the clouds and could sense the warmth from the hidden sun high above. As he was reeling in the warmth, his phone buzzed, announcing his visitors. "Thank you, Marcia. Please show them in." Louis stood behind his couch and waited. The door opened, and in walked 2 individuals. The similarities were absolutely amazing. The man and woman looked exactly like Nate and Maddie. "Wow!" Louis giggled uncontrollably and rushed to greet them. "This is just too damn spooky. How was your trip to the mall? And your escape?" He laughed loudly, startling the couple. With a huge smile and trying hard to contain his excitement, he once again looked toward the heavens, thanking God for his assistance. The couple stood quietly staring at each other in the shadows of Louis's office. Maddie limped wearily down the long hallway with Nate at her side. It was getting easier and easier to move around with her prosthesis. It almost felt as though it was a part of her now that the pain was almost completely gone. Her limp was barely noticeable, but she still used her cane. As long as she wore pants, no one would ever know the difference, and this was important to her. Nate held her hand, and she glanced up at him with a smile. Her cane clicking on the tiled floor was the only sound echoing off the walls. They reached the end of the hall, and Maddie tightened her grip on Nate's hand. "What is it, sweetheart?" he asked tenderly. She paused and looked and took in a deep breath. "I'm scared. I don't know what they'll want from me now. I don't have much left, Nate." "Well, there's only one way to find out." He smiled and firmly gripped her hand to show his support. Nate held the door open for Maddie, who entered cautiously, looking around. There was one individual sitting on a chair in the middle of the room. As Maddie entered, the woman stood and smiled. Maddie was stunned and not sure what to say. Nate gently nudged her toward the woman. He was chuckling. He knew that from this point on their fears and worries were over. Maddie walked slowly toward the woman, who also walked towards Maddie, and gave her a huge, warm hug. Maddie's tears flowed. "Madam President, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, my dear. It is our turn now." And she continued to comfort Maddie in her arms. Officer Brio peeked over Carrie's right shoulder. "Not a bad job you guys are doing in here," he said smugly. "Thanks," Carrie replied, trying hard to ignore the disgusting odor of Brio's breath. "Wow, check this place out," he said. "Give you feds a room and you plaster stuff on the walls just like in the movies." He glanced at the pictures and reports strategically placed on the walls with sticky notes everywhere. "Uh-huh," she said, still ignoring him. She tried to keep her eyes on Brio without turning her head, but it was hard to do with him behind her. "So you like being a fed, young lady? You're a pretty gal. Why would you want to waste your time doing this kind of stuff?" She continued to ignore him, and he walked around the room, taunting her with sarcastic remarks. It wasn't long before Dr. Thurston arrived with dinner. Snyder wasn't far behind. "What's up?" Thurston asked Carrie. "Just working." "Well, I'll let you feds eat," Brio said. "I'll be at my desk if you need anything." He walked slowly to his seat in the far corner of the room and started to shuffle through his papers again. "What was that all about?" Snyder asked. "Not sure," Carrie answered, popping a straw into her drink. "Every so often he'll come in here, wander around, and check things out." "Curious?" Thurston stated. "Isn't that what killed the cat?" Snyder asked. And they all laughed. Chapter 71. The phone on Dr. Lewis's desk rang 3 times before he picked it up. He listened to the voice at the other end, but was not listening to what was being said. He knew what was happening, but the fear in his stomach was more than he wanted to deal with at the moment. "Dr. Lewis, did you hear me?" I said. "Project Escape has begun. Dr. Lewis?" "Thank you," was all he said. He glanced around his office. His heart was pounding. Is this going to work? He wondered. He picked up his phone and dialed the number he had memorized. "It's me," he said simply. "Project Escape has begun." Brio clicked off his phone and glanced around the room. No one was paying him any attention. It was almost dawn. He knew another call would come through on his main line in about 5 minutes. He turned to see what his feds were doing. They looked exhausted. Carrie was asleep on her folded arms, and the men were examining some recently arrived pictures. Brio felt sorry for the agents and wondered if he had ever been sent on a wild goose chase like this during his career with the government. He pulled out one of his desk drawers and smiled. Empty. He had never thought to put anything in them. He laughed to himself. What a life. The phone on his desk rang. He glanced over his shoulder at his feds. "This is it, guys." He took in a deep breath and answered on the second ring. "Brio here." "What? Holy shit!" Carrie woke when she heard Brio shouting into his phone. "What's happening?" she asked groggily. "Don't know," Thomas answered, walking toward the shouts. Brio slammed down the phone and turned toward the agents. His face was flushed with excitement. "Bingo and holy shit, guys and gals! We've got 'em!" Arvil popped out of his temporary office from the other side of the room. "What do you mean we've got 'em? Who's the we?" "They've been spotted 2 states away in North Dakota. Pack your bags, guys. We're on our way." "Damn, we're so close to putting something together here," Thomas yelled. Brio smiled. "I'll pack up everything and send it to your home office. Go on, go, and get them. What are you waiting for?" Carrie grabbed Thomas's arm. "Let's go." Chapter 72. Brio stood in Dr. Lewis's office studying the decor. Must be nice to be rich and famous, he thought. The dark hardwood stood out against the deep forest green walls. The golden tapestries added to the flare of mystery that echoed throughout the room. Brio was examining an intricately carved wooden horse when Dr. Lewis entered. "Dime store special," Lewis said. "I believe it cost a whole $5. Do you want it?" "No, thank you, sir. Just passing the time." Brio cautiously put the horse back on the shelf. $5 my ass, he commented to himself while he faced Dr. Lewis, not sure if he had aggravated the man. Without taking his eyes off his desk, Dr. Lewis said, "I know that the usual way of giving your new assignment is by handing you paperwork. However, Agent Brio, I felt it would behoove everyone involved if I spoke with you in person. You are one of our best agents, and if I simply handed you some printed words, I'm afraid you would never fully understand what is required of you." "No problem, sir." Brio was definitely interested now. He had felt his last assignment had been rather stupid and useless, a total waste of his valuable experience. Pretending to be an arrogant police sergeant and spying on a group of young federal agents was a joke. He was hoping his next assignment would fully utilize his vast years of experience and extraordinary capabilities. After all, he had been one of the top men in the Army Special Forces unit and had been with the agency as a field agent for over 15 years. He was not some young rookie looking for excitement to spice up his life anymore. His time was valuable, and he didn't appreciate being assigned to useless cases. "I need you to work closely with one of my senior scientists," Dr. Lewis said. His abilities are unmatched by anyone in the field." "What exactly is his field, Doctor?" Brio asked, excitement enticing him on. Lewis smiled. "I'll let you decide." A skinny young man, looking no older than 20, entered the room. He walked with a slow stride, and his shoulders were hunched. His hair was a curly mess and needed a severe brushing. He wore a white lab coat covered with stains. His shoes were worn beyond repair and needed a decent burial in the old trash can. He held a clipboard with various types of what resembled notes or some kind of a report. Brio had a vision of a wind blowing through the room and papers flying everywhere, and this young man scrambling madly to regain some type of order. He looked frail and meek, and Brio immediately felt sorry for him. Brio wondered if he was an escort to the great scientist Lewis was talking about. "Agent Brio," Lewis said, "I want you to meet Dr. Loomsbury, head of our Research and Development Department." He paused to let Brio pick his jaw back up off the floor. "Dr. Loomsbury, this is Agent Willard Brio." Dr. Loomsbury stood hunched and quiet. He glanced ever so slightly at the agent and then fixed his gaze back to his notes. "If you'll follow him, Agent Brio, and work closely with our good doctor, I believe you'll discover your next assignment should be rather challenging." With that, Lewis held out his hand. Brio stood quietly in the thought for a moment, wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into this time. He shook Lewis's hand and followed the young scientist from the room. With assistance from 2 men in uniform, the agents hopped off the Army helicopter and ran to the van waiting for them next to the landing platform. Carrie had enjoyed the ride and all the special attention. Thomas was just happy to avoid any more airline terminals. He was ready to get all this over with and go home. It was time to start piecing his life back together. Now that his mother was no longer a major part of his life, he had to decide how he would fill the empty void that was tugging at his heart. The tarmac was icy, and it was hard for his feet to balance his weight. As he skidded to a stop near the van, his feet gave way on the slippery ice, and he felt himself going down. But before his head hit the concrete, 2 strong arms grabbed hold. Thomas was immediately jolted back to a time when he was very young and his father's hands and arms were his world. He could see his father's face clearly and could hear him calling, "My big, strong boy." Thomas could smell him, touch him. Thomas felt warm and secure and did not want to leave. He was finally safe. He was home at last. But as quick as the vision came, it was gone. "Here you go, sir," the young man yelped as he helped Thomas to his feet. The noise from the chopper blades drowned out the sounds. Thomas nodded his thanks to the man and climbed into the van, the recent memory still haunting him. Was he betraying the memory of his father by hunting down his mother? Why that memory here, now? How could he suddenly remember his father's face so clearly? "You okay, Thomas?" Carrie asked, scooting over and awakening him from his thoughts. "Yeah, I'm fine." But was he? Brio found himself entering a large, elaborate laboratory. Scientific equipment lined the shelves, and several tables contained unfinished experiments, or those not yet started. The room smelled of stale chemicals. Vials of different colored liquids lined the shelves in an orderly fashion. Brio looked toward the young doctor as a white lab coat was tossed at him. He caught it and held it out to look it over. "Thanks," he said, slipping an arm into a sleeve. "Yes, Agent Brio, I look young," Dr. Loomsbury said suddenly. "If you need to know my credentials, they're in the binder over there. I have so many I can no longer display them on the walls." He didn't look directly at Brio, but continued to review his notes as he spoke. "So you're a real doctor, Brio asked in a slightly sarcastic tone. "If you're asking if I'm a medical doctor, the answer is no. If you're asking if I have the title of doctor, the answer is yes. If you must know, I have 4 PhDs. molecular physics, solar neutrino physics, nuclear chemistry, and nuclear bioelectronics. Now, are there any other questions we need to have answered before we begin? Dr. Bloomsbury looked Brio directly in the eyes this time. All right, you've got my attention. Exactly how old are you? I'm not as young as you might think, nor do I believe that is relevant, Agent Brio. However, I will tell you that I've been working here for over 20 years or so. Bloomsbury paused and smiled. I've been told before that I carry my age well. Any other questions, Agent? Not now, Brio said in a low voice as he continued to snoop around the laboratory. The doctor shook his head and went back to his notes. The van pulled up in front of a large building. Thomas was sure they were still on the Army base. The ride had been relatively short, and they hadn't passed by or through any gates, nor had he seen any guards. The area was as bright as day, even though it was almost 1 in the morning. He was frozen to the bone and wanted nothing more than a hot shower and a warm bed. Sleep would be a welcomed luxury right now. The ability to simply forget everything and fall away into a blissful summer would be too good to be true. To be wiped clean of all memories, all pain. Start fresh and new. He instantly thought of Marlena and the girls, and he wanted nothing more than to be in his wife's arms right now, so safe, so warm. Thomas! Carrie shouted from behind, running to catch up. Are you sure you're all right? You've been acting really funny lately. Maddie watched as Thomas and his party walked confidently toward the hangar. She could tell he was tired and worn out. Nate placed a hand on her shoulder and she stroked his fingers with hers. I'm worried about him, Nate. He doesn't look real good, but it is wonderful to see him. I want to run to him and hold him close. I want my Charlie, too. Her eyes filled with tears. I know, baby, so do I. They watched their son as he walked into the large, brightly lit building. Excuse me, folks, a young man in uniform told them, but your helicopter is ready to take you to your plane. Maddie and Nate slowly followed him out of the room. She didn't feel well at all, physically or emotionally. Brio could not believe what he was looking at, nor could he believe his own ears. He used his little finger to jiggle his inner ear and tried to clear his mind. The implication of what this young mad scientist was saying was total lunacy. Wait a fucking minute. I honestly believe you have completely lost your marbles, Doc. You want me to do what? To where? Dr. Bloomsbury rolled his eyes and shook his head. He sneered an evil little grin at Brio and ignored his outburst. As I was saying, the power behind the blast will be enough to bring the structure down, but not enough to destroy the DNA evidence. Although the remains are fragile, I honestly believe that as long as they're away from the initial blast, the DNA should remain intact. Well, I hope if I ever need a favor, you guys are on my side. Brio ran his fingers through his thinning hair, which he was sure had turned completely gray by now. I guess this will work. He took in a deep breath and walked around the monster that the young mad scientist had created. I guess I just don't know. Yeah, I can do what you want, all right, but I hope like hell you know exactly what this thing is gonna do. I'd hate to hit it dead on, then find myself 6 blocks away with a broken neck. Shit, man, you guys really are fucking crazy. He shook his head. Sir, do you really think I would let anything happen to one of our agents? Brio laughed. He looked Dr. Bloomsbury directly into his eyes. You may have a high IQ, but you're one dumb son of a bitch, and the worst of it is that you know it, don't you? Damn, this is going to be one hell of a 4th of July party during the month of February. He paused for a few minutes, then continued. Hell, why not? Let's do it.